Today, my topic is Henry David Thoreau's Walden. About Henry David Thoreau, he was born in Concord, Massachusetts. He was a close friend of Ralph Waldo Emerson. In 1845, Thoreau decided to live alone, that is, far away from the trappings of civilization. He lived in a simple hut on the bank of Concord. He lived like an Indian yogi. He found in Hindu scriptures a way of life with which he felt a profound affinity. The Upanishads, the Gita, the Manusmriti and other Hindu scriptures influenced him. He was one of the major authors of American Transcendentalism. Walden, or The Life in the Woods, is based on his life at Walden Pond from July 1845 to September 1847. It consists of 18 essays on various topics. Thoreau decided to simplify his life by building and living in a cabin by the banks of Walden Pond, about a mile and a half from the center of Concord. While Thoreau lived at Walden, he spent a night in the Concord jail that became the basis for the famous essay. Now it is known as Civil Disobedience. Thoreau had not paid his poll tax to the town for several years because he opposed the use of town revenues to finance the US war with Mexico and enforcement of slavery laws. The town constable, when arresting him, offered to pay the tax himself, but Thoreau refused and spent a night in jail. The tax was paid that very night, most likely by Thoreau's hand. But Thoreau was not released until the morning, and he gave a speech to the Concord Lyceum that would be adopted to be the essay Resistance to Civil Government. It was published in the year 1849. And his famous work Civil Disobedience contains two famous statements, that is, the government is best which governs the least, and another one is no taxation without representation. And Mahatma Gandhi was highly influenced by Thoreau's essay Civil Disobedience. Thoreau had suffered from tuberculosis and he died at home in Concord at the age of 45. His famous works are Excursion, The Maine Woods, Cape Cod, and many. In Walden, Thoreau explores his interest in naturalism, individualism, and self-sufficiency. He says he lived there for 2 years and 2 months and then moved back to civilized society. In a prophetic vein, he tells us that his Walden experiment was intended to instruct his fellow men who labor under a mistake about life, work, and leisure. It is never obvious whether this is the diary of a private experience, a sermon delivered to his fellow men, and extended his fantasy about life in the woods, or a piece of nature writing. So here the first chapter. The name of the chapter is Economy. In his first chapter, Economy, Thoreau introduces his purpose in writing the book, saying he intends to answer questions people have asked about his reason for living alone in a cabin in the woods near Walden Pond for 2 years. He explains that most people live their life as if sleeping, blindly following the ways of their parents, and become trapped into these lives by owning property and slaving in jobs to maintain their way of life. In contrast, he sought to discover the true necessities of life and build a cabin for the cost of $28.12 near Walden Pond, where he lived for 2 years, beginning in the summer of 1845. And later he is making a profit of $8 by selling the beans he grew and working occasionally at odd jobs. He found he was able to support himself with very little work and much time for contemplation of himself and nature. Henry David Thoreau is often believed to be the first nature writer and concerned ecologist who followed the teachings and revolutionary ideas of his mentor as well as writer Ralph Waldo Emerson. Both of them belonged to the American Transcendentalism movement, which was expressed intellectually and emotionally by various writers from the group. His prose poem Walden or Life in Woods considered to be the starting point of eco-criticism in American critical thought. It experiments of living in harmony with nature, and he has a passion for exploring deeper meaning in nature. So, the suitable theory that would clarify the symbolic meaning of nature or environment in Walden is eco-criticism. Eco-criticism is the study of the relationship between literature and environment. Thoreau tells us in the first paragraph Economy that his Walden project was only a temporary experiment, not a lifelong commitment to an idea. He never claims to be a modern socialist or a pioneer hero. He never portrays himself as a successful farmer or house builder. As for self-reliance, he is content merely to have acquired a house for little money, relying more or less on his own labor. As people suppose they need to own things, this need forces them to devote all their time to labor, and the result is the loss of inner freedom. He asserts that in their own way, farmers are chained to their farms just as much as prisoners are chained in jails. So here the detailed description about this work Economy. Thoreau offers an honest account of his stay near Walden Pond in answer to the questions from friends and townsmen. If I am to speak truthfully, I must speak of myself because I am the only person thoroughly known to myself. The labors of the townsmen are endless. Their greatest misfortune lay in inheriting farms and houses. It would have been better if they were born in the open fields, suckled by wolves. Those who are not burdened by the farms have only to cultivate their bodies. Most persons lead mean and wretched lives because they seek to get into business or to get out of debt. This is very worse than driving Negroes as slaves, because these men are slaves of driving themselves. We speak of the divinity of man and yet waste our lives in materialistic pursuits. Man's true destiny can be pursued if man understands himself correctly. Many of them lead their lives with quite depression. But wisdom does not allow man to act desperately. The old ones cannot instruct the youth, and they have no valuable advice to give the young, because their experience was limited and their lives have been failures. Life is an experiment which has yet to be tried, and each one must try it for himself, following his own bent. The physical routine of life is dull and old, very monotonous. But the abilities of men are not yet measured. According to Thoreau, that the good aimed at by the people is really evil. As a transcendentalist, his conscience was so irresistible as to drive him away from what people called wisdom. The problem of solving one's livelihood is attempted in a complicated way by the farmer. He employs great skill in laying a trap and gets his own leg into it. So he is very poor. Many uncivilized or primitive persons own their own houses, but many civilized persons live in rented houses and run after many comforts and amenities. This only leads them into huge debts. Civilization may have improved our house, but it has not improved the men who have to live there. It is by a little physical effort that we can acquire the necessities of life. But man has increased his dependence on things by inventing houses, clothes, and cooked food. While the New Hollander, without any luxuries, can go naked. Without any sensation of cold, the European shivers in his clothes. This is the most essential thing, is to preserve the vital heat which is in us. Many luxuries and comforts of life are superfluous, and they are even positive obstacles in the way of living. The ancient philosophers of India and China had no outward riches, but inwardly they were the richest persons in this world. What is life? It has to be understood from the vantage ground of voluntary poverty. The philosopher loves wisdom and lives accordingly a life of simplicity, independence, trust, and magnanimity. He offers a theoretical and practical solution to all problems of life. The pains that we take to provide food, shelter, and clothing to ourselves are out of proportion. We rob birds' nests to provide beds for ourselves. Fuel we use except for food is unnecessary. The sun is our fire, giving us all the warmth we need. But the rich provide themselves with many things, thus they are kept unnaturally hot. Thoreau advises not the strong person who well-to-do, but the weak and discontent who keep on complaining of their fate. Those who have lot of wealth do not know how to use it. This is the fate. He advises his fellow men to minimizing their needs. He identifies only 4 necessities: that is, food, shelter, clothing and fuel. Since nature itself provides all those things, a person willing to accept the basic gifts of nature can live off the land with minimal toil. Any attempt at luxury is likely to prove more a hindrance than a help to an individual's improvement. The primitive life of savages is cheaper, healthier and wiser as compared to the complex life of the civilized people. In education, the student should learn the art of actually living it. Instead of knowing how his bread is made, he seeks the intricacies of chemistry. Thus, the student studies the economic theories of Smith and Ricardo and his father runs into debt. The Indian went to the lawyer to sell his baskets. The lawyer turned him away because he needed none. "What? Do you mean to starve us?" asked the Indian. The lawyer gets money and prestige by weaving arguments. Why should not the Indian get the same for weaving baskets? The Indian, to be successful, should sell what the others want or weave some such things as is wanted by others. If labor is unrewarded, destitution or desperation appear. The best thing is to avoid the necessity of selling your baskets, howsoever delicate they are. Why should we prize one type of life as successful and the other as a failure? The rich start the fashions in clothes, houses and education, and the poor laboriously follow it. The heathen built splendid temples, but how much more admirable is the Bhagavad Gita than all the ruins of the East. The stones hammered by a nation go towards the tombs. In a life of simplicity and wisdom, maintaining ourselves is not a hardship but a pastime. It is not necessary that a man should earn his bread by labor. Philanthropy is capable of great mischief and misuse. We should insist on justice. Charities hide a multitude of sins. Man should be like the cypress tree, which flourishes in all seasons and it contented and happy. So overall, he states his beliefs about society and environment, saying that to simplify their lives, people need to not work as hard as they do and follow their instincts. He wants to have a life of voluntary poverty for himself that have only the basic needs: food, shelter, clothing and fuel. He criticizes society for its emptiness and people's obsession with clothing, travel, fancy houses and the use of animal labor. He builds his own small cabin, earns some money by working in his bean field. He celebrates becoming a part of nature when he chooses where to live. His purpose was of going to the woods is, as he states, to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Taking nature as his model, he thinks that a man must be a seer and listener and always alert to nature. After being transformed by his experience there, Thoreau concludes that with spiritual awareness and reverence for nature, new life can rise out of an individual. The next topic of this Walden, where I lived and what I lived for, I will explain it in my next session, and thank you.